evening, welcome. Tonight's shiur is called the Triangle of Holiness. The Triangle of Holiness, of course, indicates that there is something that is threefold, a holiness that has three dimensions or three connections. We will soon investigate that. But as an introduction to that, there's a very interesting piece of Zohar. Zohar, of course, being one of the fundamental Kabbalistic writings written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the great Talmudic scholars who lived approximately 2,000 years ago in the northern part of Israel, and he's buried in the city of Miron. Those who visit, especially on Lag BaOmer, which is the day of his passing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai writes, the Zohar praises those that prepare a dwelling place for the Shekhinah. Shekhinah is a name in Hebrew called the divine presence. I will discuss that in a minute. What does that mean? That Shekhinah, the divine presence. So the Zohar praises those that prepare a dwelling place for the Shekhinah, for the divine presence, on Shabbat, within the chambers of the hearts of men. So we have three concepts here. We have preparing a dwelling place for the divine presence on Shabbat, but in the hearts of men. What is the connection? And what does it all mean? The divine presence, I'm not going to be too sophisticated, but whenever it says the Shekhinah in Kabbalistic terminology, it refers to, for those who we touched upon a little bit, is the level of Malchut, the Atzilut. It is the level of the kingship of God in the world of Atzilut, the highest world, the world of emanation. Which means to say that we are drawing down a particular light of godliness that is beyond this material world. That is the Shekhinah, that is the divine presence. The divine presence is a revelation of God that is really beyond this world. And it is our obligation to reveal the divine presence. And how does one reveal the divine presence? By making this world worthy and a fitting vessel, that the vessel is refined enough to be able to contain this particular light, that ordinarily this light is hidden. So it is our obligation. Says the Zohar, particularly this is great, and praises those that do it within the chambers of our hearts on Shabbat. Why? We will soon see them. Let us discuss the concept of the divine presence first of all. The Torah says, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham." Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within them. Make for me a sanctuary, which means a place holy. Mikdash. Mikdash in Hebrew means something holy. Make for me a holy place. And when you make for me a holy place, in other words, make for me means to say prepare. You have to prepare. Anything holy needs preparedness. Anything holy needs a distancing from something that is mundane. The word in Hebrew, kadosh, means separated, muvdal, kadosh. When a person puts on a ring, when he's mekadesh, when he sanctifies his wife, when he consecrates his wife, he says, "You are hereby betrothed or consecrated to me with this ring, according to the law of Moses and of Israel." The word mekudeshet, hare'at mekudeshetli, you are hereby sanctified or consecrated to me with this ring, means that you are sanctified to me, and you join me, and you become asura lechol adam. You become now no longer permitted to any other man. You are separated from any other man. In other words, you are my wife, and you can no longer be the wife of any other person. There is a separation, a preparedness, a moving from one dimension to another. Here, this woman was a pnuya. She was a woman that was not a bachelor. What do you call the other word? Spinster. Is that still a nice word today? Or not? No, sir. Spinster, it almost indicates like a woman sitting there by herself, and she's 75 years old, and she's like sewing away, you know what I mean? That's what. A bachelorette. Okay. A woman who is not married, she's not married. Technically, halachically speaking, she can marry any person she chooses. The moment she receives that ring, she's mekudeshet. She's betrothed, she's consecrated, she's holy. It becomes a holy union. Part of holiness is separation from the mundane. Part of holiness is separated from others. And now she's enjoined to him. So to the concept of consecration or holiness. In order to be holy, we must separate from mundane. It says, Ve'asuli mikdash, make for me, which means to say that there has to be a conscious preparedness to make a holy place for God. The obvious question is, why does it say betocham, in them, and not betocho? There was one sanctuary at one time where God commanded the Jewish people to build a sanctuary. The Midrash, the Sheikh HaKadosh says that betoch libam shel kol echad ve'echad, within the hearts of every man. We mentioned on a previous occasion, so I'm not going to elaborate on this. Ohel shiken ba'adam. David HaMelech says, Ohel shiken ba'adam. The tent of tabernacle, the Ohel, the tent of tabernacle, shiken ba'adam. He dwelled within the hearts of men, which means to say that our hearts can mirror everything that the tabernacle represents. And we spoke about that in a different shiur. You can look at it in the internet. Which means that it's not only the physical place and tangible place of the sanctuary or the Bet HaMikdash or the Holy Temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah that is sanctified and holy and can be a place for the divine presence, but like the Zohar says, in the hearts of men. There's something unique to the hearts of men. And in fact, when it says, V'ikhu li teruma, me'et kol asher yidvenu libo, take from me teruma, a contribution, but the word teruma comes from the word tarum, means to separate, take something and give it away. Also comes from the word tarum, to lift up. When you give something with all of your heart, God says, take a donation, take donations for people, but only those people are sincere. Only those people who give, who are motivated with their emotions of their heart. Because our heart must mirror that which the sanctuary represents. The sanctuary represents a place of the divine presence. And therefore, if we are not going to give with all of our hearts, then it doesn't mirror what the whole concept of the sanctuary represents. The sanctuary represents the divine presence being revealed and real in our lives. That godliness is a real part of our lives, revealed. The Midrash says, one of the reasons that God created the world, the Midrash says, Nitava kadosh baruch hu liot lo dira b'tachtonim. The Almighty desired that he has a dwelling place down below. What does it mean, a dwelling place? A dwelling place is not where he works. A dwelling place is not his throne. A dwelling place is not his palace. A dwelling place is not a place where a person does pleasure or enjoyment. A dwelling place is where he is himself. A king on his throne is a king. A person at work is working. A CEO is a CEO. A doctor is a doctor. But when you go home, that doctor ceases to be a doctor and begins to be himself. A husband, a father, he begins to be himself. The king in his own chamber, in his private chamber, in his private abode, is no longer a king. Is he himself. The Almighty desires not just to be the king or the master of the world or the creator of the world, but he desires to be himself. The way, so to speak, he is in the upper abodes, he desires to be down below. And as I mentioned below, the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, is a very godly level of which every dimension of spirituality there is totally nullified before God, is unified before God, and recognizes that unity. The fact that every dimension of this world is unified with God, that's a reality whether we like it or not. We are created by God, we are created ex nihilo, and we are dependent upon God for every single second of our existence. That is a fact whether we like it or not, whether we recognize it or not. Our objective is to recognize it, to make it real. But in the upper worlds, in the higher world, the world of Atzilut, there it is real, there it is recognized, that reality is true and recognized and known, and thus the spiritual light or entity that exists in that level is totally nullified before God. That concept must be replicated in this world. And that is what the Shekhinah means. The Shekhinah means to take a high level of godliness and to reveal it down below. Despite the fact that we are material, despite the fact that we are tangible, despite the fact that we have feelings of self and feelings that we are a separate entity and that we think that we exist on our own, we don't give much thought to the fact that we are totally dependent, nullified before God. We have to consciously think about it and ponder and meditate upon that idea and nullify ourselves before that concept. But it doesn't come natural to us. In the realm of Atzilut, in this world of emanation, in this high lofty level, in the inner chamber of the king, that is when the king is revealed as him himself. On that level, that is real, that is felt, that is known. And their existence is not felt. That has to be replicated in this world, and that is what it means, the divine presence, the Shekhinah, the divine presence. That the divine presence has to be revealed, which means the more the divine presence is revealed, the more we are separated from the mundane, the more we feel less of ourselves, less of our ego, the more we are nullified before God and behave and act the truth of the reality of God's unified existence in this world. So betocham, in them plural, does not only mean in the tabernacle, but it means in the heart of every single individual. And we have the propensity and the ability to do so. And that is why the donation had to be propelled by one's heart, by one's emotions, because it had to mirror what the tabernacle is all about. If it didn't, then it was worthless, because it defeated the whole purpose of what the tabernacle is all about, that the divine presence is real and revealed and relevant in this world. If you're giving it for ulterior purposes, it defeats the whole purpose. It's again associated with ego. And the concept of the divine presence being revealed is the divestment of ego, is the removal. Holiness means separated from mundane. Holiness means moving away from the material, moving away from the ego, and being connected, kadosh, being connected to holiness. The Zohar says that the closest place to Hashem in this world exists within the hearts of His people. And therefore, when one is motivated to give with one's heart, then this is the beginning of the preparedness of the sanctity of the sanctuary, and the beginning of the revelation in a real and tangible way that we feel it. The fact that godliness exists in this world, and godliness is every aspect of this world is nullified before God, as I mentioned, is a reality. But we have to make that reality understood and felt by every single one of us. Therefore, this leads us to what it says in Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah is an even older book, older than the Zohar HaKadosh, which is attributed to Abraham Avinu, Abraham, our first forefather. A book of called the Book of Formation, which is a very holy Kabbalistic work. There it says that there are 3 types of holiness, and thus the Triangle of Holiness. So 3 types of holiness. The first holiness is the holiness that exists within time. The second holiness is a holiness that exists within space, place. And the third holiness is the holiness that can exist within man. Let's see. The first time the word holy exists in the Torah, is mentioned in the Torah, is in reference to the Shabbat, where there it says, and He blessed the 7th day, and He made it holy. Vaykadesh oto. Vaykadesh. He made the Shabbat holy. The Almighty sanctified the Shabbat. The Shabbat is separated from all other mundane things. If you have a look, the 6 days of the week are 6. So each one has a bat zug, each one has a partner. Shabbat is totally distinct, separated. If you take a circle, whichever size, doesn't matter which size, and you draw a circle around the circumference of a cup, take a cup any size, draw a circle around it, and then draw another circle around it in a circle, in the shape of a circle, you will get always how many circles do you think? 6. And there will be the exact circumference of that cup of the circle exactly in the middle, representing that all the 6 days of the week are interrelated with one another, but they're separated and divided from Shabbat. Shabbat is a separate entity. To the extent that, so to speak, Shabbat said every day of the week has a partner except me. And Hashem said, I give the Jewish people as you, your partner. The Almighty sanctified the Shabbat, and thus He separated from the mundane, from the weekday activities. It is a day by which the Almighty's speech is not revealed, but the day by which the Almighty's thought, so to speak, is revealed, which is much higher, it's much more intimate. Speech is not as intimate. Speech is, you speak to someone else, because you want to deliver a message. You want to reveal what you're feeling, what you're thinking, you want to tell them something. If you're a king, you want to order something, etc. So when you speak, ordinarily, if everything's 100%, you're speaking to someone. If things are not 100%, then I don't know who you're speaking to, maybe to the wall. Speech is to someone else, to a separate entity, which means that when the Almighty created the world through speech, He's interacting, so to speak, with a lower level creation that feels itself as a separate entity, like I would speak to someone that is a separate entity than me, even though that someone may be my son. And that son comes and emanates from me, but still he's a separate entity now that he was born. Thought is absolutely unified with me. And that's why Shabbat is individual and singular, because that represents a more intimate relationship with Hashem. Just like thought is intimate with me, so too the Shabbat is intimate with Hashem. And Shabbat is divided, Shabbat is separated from the rest of the weekday. So the Almighty sanctified the Shabbat. And that's the first mention of holiness, the Shabbat. Time, where the Almighty sanctified the Shabbat. The second place that we find the word holy or sanctified in reference to place. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the site, to the mountain, which will be potentially where Har Sinai, where the Torah will be given, Har Sinai. And he sees a burning bush, and he hears the word of God, and the word of God tells him, Sha'an alechem an arglecha, take off your shoes from upon your feet, ki hamakom she'ata omed alav admat kodeshu, for the place that you stand is holy ground. Holy ground. Place becomes holy. And where there is holiness, there cannot be a division. You must remove the shoes. You must remove the division, as we spoke about in another time. Holy. There is a concept of making a place holy. And further we find, Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocha. Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within them. When the Jewish people camped and they received the Torah, the whole Machaneh Israel was holy, was a holy camp. And it had halachic ramifications for those who were impure or those who were afflicted with tzarat, with leprosy. Thank you. So we find that place can also be sanctified. The mikdash, the sanctuary, the tabernacle. Within the tabernacle itself, there's the holy and the holy of holies. The Bet HaMikdash in Har Moriah, in Mount Moriah, is a holy place. You can't go up there if you're impure. If you came in contact with the dead or whatever, whichever impurity, can't go up there. Holy place. Holy place again means distinct, separated from mundane, that which is not holy. Something that is prepared. How do you prepare? Take off your shoes. Take off that which divides you, which separates you from the holy. It's interesting to note when God told Moshe Rabbeinu to come up the mountain to receive the Torah, He says, "V'ish lo ya'aleh imach," and man shall not come up with you. There are those that reinterpret that to mean, or take it literally to mean, V'ish, your material side, your ish, your ishiyut, your personality, your person, your ego, your being, your material being, lo ya'aleh shall not go up. Come up. But leave all the material part of you, leave the man part of you, leave the ego part of you, leave it down below. Because there's no place, when you come up Mount Sinai, there's no place for it. You cannot receive the teachings of the Torah with such an attitude. You must divest yourself of that attitude. We find a similar thing, that one of the great scholars, Rav Zera, who was an expert in the Babylonian Talmud, and when he wanted to acquire the wisdom of the Jerusalem Talmud, or a higher form of learning or understanding Torah, he just didn't go and start learning the new discipline. In fact, fasted 40 days to forget the old. Because he did not want to come with the same mindset of the old, with the new, and embrace the new, the same mindset. So he fasted, both in his atonement, but also as a preparation, but also in order to forget what he learned on a seeming lower level, in order to acquire the higher level, again, a preparedness for something that is holy. And as I mentioned, from time to time, an example of this, a good example of this, is a person who owned a corner shop, a milk bar, and he runs the milk bar in accordance with the principles that how you run a milk bar. You buy 3 cans of tuna, and you're running out two are sold, then you go and you buy another 3, and you have 1 spare, and etc., etc. And you buy in accordance with 3, and you can only lay out a certain amount. All of a sudden, his great uncle who didn't have children passed away, and he inherited the chain of IGA or Woolworths or Coles. You can imagine that if he would come and run Coles with the same system of thought and principles of the milk bar, the whole thing will fail. Maybe that's why Myers now is not doing so good. Maybe the CEO had that mentality, he didn't fast for 40 days, maybe. You'd have to totally divest yourself of that mentality and idea to be able to acquire a new way, a new system of how to run the place. That is holiness, preparedness. Preparedness. And then the third is man, where God says, "Vatem tihyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh." You will be unto me a nation of priests, or princes, or leaders, v'goy kadosh, and a holy nation. Holy nation. Again, we find the word holiness that can be associated with man. So we have holy in time, Shabbat, holy in place, Mount Moriah, and also the Mishkan where the tabernacle resided, and holiness in man. V'nitkadashtem v'yetem kedoshim, and shall be sanctified, and you shall sanctify yourself, says Hashem. One of the commandments is kadesh atzmecha b'mutar lach. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to sanctify yourself. What does it mean, sanctify yourself? What do you think? So if I were to tell someone, what does it mean to sanctify? So what do you think? Study more Torah, right? Put on tefillin, pray, do the mitzvot, do them with a bit more intention, correct? Absolutely not. If it's a separate mitzvah, then it must be in addition to the other mitzvot. Sure, you become holy. Sure, you become sanctified through every mitzvah that you do. But the fact that it says, sanctify yourself and become holy is a different dimension altogether. It must be a new mitzvah, a new dimension of holiness. What is that? The sages say, kadesh atzmecha b'mutar lach. Sanctify yourself when you do mitzvot and you do not transgress. There's a certain level of sanctity. You're obligated to do this and you're obligated not to do this. But then there are things that are permissible to you. The Torah says, they'll also be holy. You're permitted to eat, but be holy in the way they eat. We're not talking about kosher. That's a commandment. You're obligated to do it. We're not talking about making a bracha. The sages instituted, based upon biblical teachings, that you have to make a bracha. You have to thank God. Everything belongs to Hashem. You must take permission from it. Must be a new dimension. Don't be a glutton. Eat, but don't be a glutton. Think some spiritual thoughts when you eat. Think about refining the world. Don't eat more than what you need to eat. Don't be so hooked up to the material world, so dependent upon the material world. Have some noble ideas and thoughts behind your eating. Let not your eating be wasted. Let it be an act of upliftment, of service of God. Similarly, when you go to sleep or any other activity, don't let it just be a dry, physical, mundane activity and remain like that's permitted. You're permitted to walk next to beautiful trees and relax your mind. You're not permitted to waste time from Torah, but you're permitted to take some time off to relieve your mind or the stress of the mind or to do some exercise for your health and these different types of things where you can have time to study Torah. Study Torah. Don't flick through the channels. Study Torah. But when you need to take a break by all means. But even as you take a break, use that as an opportunity to see the wondrousness and the kindness of God. You're permitted. You're permitted to eat. You're permitted to drink. But you utilize that as an opportunity to sanctify yourself and sanctify what you eat. Kadesh atzmecha b'mutar lach. Sanctify yourself with that which is even permitted for you. So I told you it's permitted. But you can do that as an act of holiness. By showing that I'm not a glutton, by showing that I do not descend to the material world, I lift up the material world. I have not descended, I have not allowed my mind and my heart to descend into the material world. There was one time a great rabbi, Rabbi Dober Radoshitz, who is, I think, buried not far from Warsaw. So you should just know. And when he was young, a young man, just newly married, he was very, very poor. And one time came Sukkot, nothing, the house was bare. The house was bare and empty. And he made a condition with his wife. He doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't want her to ask for charity or to ask for a loan. We must try and develop an absolute, total reliance and faith upon Hashem. Hashem runs the world, and if Hashem wants to feed us, He will feed us, He will find a way. Let us try and develop a level of faith to Hashem that will not be dependent upon others. And indeed he went to the synagogue and he decided to linger on because he didn't want to walk with all the other members and people will see that there's no light in his sukkah. If there's no light, in those days he used to light the candles inside the sukkah. Till today many people do. We're talking about the candles. I mean, they needed candles anyway, they had no other form of light. So if there's no money for light, then you can well imagine, then there's no money for food, there's no money for wine, there's no money for fish or meat. He didn't want people crying and asking, oh, what's happening? No, you have no light in the sukkah, and you have to answer, why I do have, I don't have it. So he decided to linger on the synagogue, he'll study, there's nothing to rush home for, nothing is waiting for him, there's no beautiful aromas waiting for him. He lingered further in the synagogue, he studied there, and he'll come home soon enough. Came home, and as he's walking home, he sees that there's light in his sukkah. He begins to suspect maybe his wife couldn't stand the pressure, and she went and borrowed from a neighbor a little bit of cash. But he decided not to say anything, not to spoil her festival. It's also mitzvah to, even though we want to have spiritual, we want to be spiritual, but be spiritual not at the expense of someone else, or putting someone else down. Sometimes we forget that because we so much we focus on the goal and we forget the people around us. It's one of those things, unfortunately. Many of us have that weakness. We have to overcome that. And he was able to overcome that. Not to get upset, not to get angry. Maybe she didn't do as he spiritually aspired for. Kept his mouth shut. Kol hakavod. Something that I have to learn. Something that self-discipline, self-control, even in spiritual matters, in physical matters for sure. But sometimes you think, spiritual matters, I wanted like this, I wanted this level of kashrut, I wanted that, I wanted the highest, the best, and then the top, and I didn't get it, and now I'm upset. I have a spiritual right to be upset. Hey, take it easy. Keep your mouth shut. It's a big blessing. And he was able to overcome that. It's not easy at the spur of the moment, isn't it? That's when we judged at the spur of the moment. Not when we planned a mitzvah, not when we planned in advance. Now I'm going to keep still for half an hour. Great. But when you didn't plan and someone came and upset you, and that's when you were still, that is greatness. So he was able to be still. And he comes in and she looks at him and he says, I bet you're wondering. I bet you think that I succumbed, didn't you? And he sort of smiled and he sort of nodded and he said, no. I had nothing to prepare for festival. So I figured, I'll clean the house. At least let me clean the house more. House is clean. It's not like we've got stuff, on the floor. And I'll clean the house. And I found a silver button from my wedding dress. Those days they made buttons out of silver and if you're more wealthy, gold. And I found it and I quickly ran to the goldsmith, silversmith, and he gave me money for it, and I was able to buy the basic necessities, candles, wine, a bit of fish, and a bit of challah. Oh, he rejoiced. And he was so happy. And he sat down the sukkah, and he made kiddush, and he had the challah. And then she served him his plate, and he began to eat. And all of a sudden he stopped and he pushed the plate. You want to imagine a person, he didn't eat for 2 days already. You're hungry after 2 days, no? We, after 3 hours, we already need to go to the fridge. We open the fridge and an apple and this and something else. And an hour later we need another snack. We don't know what it means to... Those days he used to have one meal. If you're lucky, he can have one meal. He pushed the plate. After 2 days not eating, he said, you're not sitting in the sukkah, you're sitting in your plate. Such level of separation from the material. He was so acutely aware of the sanctity and the holiness of the sukkah that to him it was sacrilege for him to just to still his hunger, even though it's a mitzvah to eat on the festival and be happy on the festival. But on his level, for him, it was sacrilege. On our level, we sometimes also stick our head in the plate, if you know what I mean. We don't sit in the sukkah, we sit in the plate, or we sit in whatever materialism that we do. That's what the Torah says, sanctify yourself with what is permissible for you. It was not only permissible for him, it was a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah, yet for him to be able to enjoy the food on his level, more so than the sanctity of the sukkah, or perhaps less aware of the sanctity of the sukkah, to him was not acceptable. Despite the fact that he was hungry, a normal person wouldn't think about the sukkah, wouldn't think about the world. One time there was a person, a visitor, came to a house, came to a town, invited to a person to eat, and the owner of the house said, where are you from? He says, I come from the city. He said, do you know Greg from the city? He said, Greg's dead. Oh, sorry to hear that. He said, do you know Joe? He lives next to the shop. No, Joe's dead. And so on and so forth. Do you know Yitzhak? He's dead too. He said, tell me, everyone in the city died? He said, no, when I eat, everyone's dead. When we involve the material world, the whole world's dead. We forget about spirituality, we forget about godliness, we forget about all of these things. Sanctity, sanctify ourselves.
Yeah, but...
However, let's just finish the point and we'll take some questions. However, so this is the triangle of holiness. Place, time, man. What happens though when we mess up? Man can mess up. We have the ability to be holy, but we have the ability to be animalistic. We have the ability to sit in our plate, so to speak. God gave us the Torah, we came to the highest level, and then later on we were running around the golden calf. We messed up. What happens when we mess up and we cause a desecration of the holy place? For example, as I said before, when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, the whole camp of Israel, you know how it was that the Jewish people camped, and then the Levites, and then the sanctuary. When the Jewish people, when God gave the Torah, the whole camp was holy. It had a very high level of sanctity. But when the Jewish people sinned, that level of sanctity was now reserved, no longer there. It became unique to the tabernacle. So we can see that we affect the sanctity of place. We also mess up within ourselves. We know that before the Jewish people sinned, every member of every household was to be the Kohen, to be the priest, the ministering priest of that family, to represent that family in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. He used to be the one that represents, like the Kohen, every firstborn of every family was to be a Kohen. Which means that every family had the dimension of priesthood. When we sinned, that was removed from them and reserved only for the Kohanim, the children of Bnei Aharon of Aharon. But there's one thing we can't mess up, and that's Shabbat. We can't mess up Shabbat. Because Shabbat mekadesha b'kayama. The sanctity of Shabbat is not dependent upon me. The sanctity of place and man is dependent upon me. True, Har Moriah is holy, but it had man's involvement. To make the tabernacle, to make the temple, had to have man's involvement. We had to give from the gifts, and it had to come from all of our hearts. We had to erect it and build it, etc. But Shabbat not the case, because that is defined by God. God sanctified the Shabbat. And because God sanctified the Shabbat, its sanctity endures forever. Therefore, if we think that we have messed up, we should never lose hope. Why must we never lose hope? Because there's always a way to rebuild that sanctity. Even though the Jewish people messed up and they sinned with the sin of the golden calf, and the level of sanctity of the divine presence was removed from the whole camp of Israel and was now reserved to be revealed only in the sanctuary, in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. Nonetheless, there still was a sanctuary in the Mishkan. So a person could come to the tabernacle, a person come to the temple in Jerusalem and be spiritually inspired. Anybody, it says, who smelt the spices that was brought on the altar of spices automatically smelled something so spiritual that he was awakened and aroused to repentance. Anybody who came within the parameters of the sanctuary in Jerusalem was uplifted. Till today, rare do you find someone, Jew or Gentile, that comes to the Wailing Wall, to the Western Wall, to the Kotel, and you don't see them somehow inspired or somehow awakened or some heartstrings is tugged. I know just thinking about it, I feel something exciting, something awesome about it, something humbling going there. And that is only the outer part of the wall of the Beit HaMikdash. So we have that. But what happens when that's destroyed? If that is destroyed, what happens then? We have the Shabbat. We have a glorious gift of Shabbat that Hashem gave us. And that endures forever. That can never be taken away. So it is our obligation to guard. Holiness must be guarded. Holiness must be prepared. It doesn't just come just like that. Just like the concept of marriage, there has to be an agreement. There has to be a willingness on the husband to consecrate and marry the wife. There has to be an agreement of the wife to accept and want to agree to live her life in connection with this man and nobody else. Because if you accept, you make a declaration, you change your status, that you can no longer be with any other man. You are separated from all other men. When you've got to make a conscious decision to be holy. It has to be a conscious decision. It's not going to come just like that. You're going to wake up one morning and it's just all of a sudden, everything around you touch and everything that you think and everything that you talk about is going to be holy. It's a conscious decision. Like marriage is a conscious decision. And you're saying, yes, I want to live with you. I don't want to live with any other person. I don't want to live with any other man. I want to live with you. I want to commit myself to you. If you're not prepared for that, if you're not willing for that, then you will not get married. You're doing the wrong thing. But when you are, you get married. And so too, any level of sanctity must be preparedness, must be a willingness to want to become holy and to want to be separated from the mundane and the unholy. Where there is that preparedness, where there is that willingness, the more there is, the more level of holiness there is. And that is our objective. And when we do that, we cause the divine presence, our relationship with God, to be real. It's real. It's tangible. It's not abstract that I believe that there is a God and I do my thing and He does His thing. God is real. And God's unity is real to me to the extent that I strive to incorporate, understand, and live my life in accordance with that divine unity with everything in this world. It takes effort, conscious effort, and will, and preparedness. As it says, Vikhuli Truma, take away Truma from all those whose heart, with generosity of heart, propels them to do so. Because it must mirror what the objective of the tabernacle is, to cause the divine presence to rest. And the divine presence does not only rest in a place, it must rest in the heart of man. There is a triangle of holiness. Time, place, man. And they come together. But if we lose those two ingredients, or we mess up those two ingredients, then we have the Shabbat. And then when we enter the Shabbat, with a proper awareness of His holiness and sanctity, and a willingness to rebuild that sanctity that we may have lost in the other two realms, when that preparedness comes within our heart, then the divine presence also rests. And this then answers our question that we began the shiur. And that question is the statement that it says in the Zohar, that praises those that prepare a dwelling place for the Shekhinah, for the divine presence to reside, to rest, to be revealed, to be as it is above, down below, on the Shabbat. Where? In the chamber of our hearts. This then, through the Shabbat, and through our preparedness and willingness, we're able to build that triangle again. Of place, of time, and man. Through the sanctity and the holiness of the Shabbat. Now this is the connection. This is what the Zohar says. Praiseworthy is those that prepare a divine, a resting place for the divine presence in the chambers of their heart. Because it is within the heart of men that is the most intrinsic dimension of holiness in this world. And through the holiness that it can exist within man, that then will be the cause of the divine presence resting in this world, in place, and that could all be rebuilt through the Shabbat.